Welcome to Unlocking the Dream Vision. I'm your host, author R.J. von-Bruening. In this video series, we'll be exploring the mysterious dream vision of Enoch as explored in my book, Unlocking the Dream Vision, The Secret History of Creation. In this video, we'll take a look at who the gods really are. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button below and don't forget to subscribe for future videos. This series presents information based in part upon theory and conjecture of the system of esoteric symbolism. The purpose is to suggest some possible interpretation, but not necessarily the only one, to the many mysteries we will explore. Who are the gods? This is the one question I think each and every one of us has asked ourselves at some point in our lives. Are they the all-knowing, all-powerful, and unknowable divine beings that so many of the faithful claim? Or could the skeptics be right and they're nothing more than the figments of the imagination of our ancient ancestors? Or could it be possible that the supporters of the ancient astronaut hypothesis are correct and they are some type of highly technologically advanced extraterrestrial alien species? Or could it be that they are entirely something different, something that nobody else has ever thought of before? As we have journeyed through the mystical symbolism of the dream vision, we have answered the first two questions, and no, they are not the all-knowing, all-powerful divine beings as so many have been taught to believe by the religions of the world. Nor are they just figments of the imagination of our ancient ancestors. As for the pop culture ancient astronaut hypothesis, although I do find it a thought-provoking and fascinating idea, I personally do not believe or accept that this idea is the correct one. As I said at the beginning of our journey, and as you have learned along the way, the supporters of the ancient astronaut hypothesis have managed to get their hands on little bits and pieces of the secret history of creation, but they've always managed to misinterpret or misrepresent it in some fashion. This does not include all the many additional scientific problems that this idea simply cannot address, or the simple fact that there is no genetic evidence to support the many claims they make about aliens. Based on our new understanding of the mystical symbolism, I think we can reasonably argue that the supporters of the ancient astronaut hypothesis have simply replaced the all-knowing, all-powerful, and unknowable gods of the religious traditions with an equally all-knowing, all-powerful, and equally unknowable extraterrestrial alien. Additionally, as you will shortly learn, there is a much more practical, simpler, and scientifically based explanation on just who the gods really are of the ancient myth and legends, and truly what they were doing. In order for us to understand who the gods are, we must first look back a bit and look at an old defunct hypothesis known as the Nemesis hypothesis, also sometimes known as the Death Star hypothesis. For those of you who have not heard of, or those who need a little refresher, the Nemesis hypothesis was proposed that our sun may have an undetected dark companion star in a highly elliptical 28 million year orbit, and upon its closest approach to the sun would move through and disturb the comets of the Oort cloud and possibly even the Kepler belt, which would then send them plunging into the inner solar system, thereby causing an increase in the number of impact events and possibly causing mass extinctions. The reason this hypothesis was proposed was because back in the 1980s, there was a paper published that identified a 28 million year cycle of mass extinctions occurring over the last 500 million years. This discovery is the reason why the Nemesis hypothesis was first proposed, in the hope to possibly explain this reoccurring 28 million year extinction cycle. Over the years since it was first proposed, this hypothesis has since fallen out of favor. This is primarily because there has been no other supporting evidence found outside of the actual extinction events themselves. Only 2, possibly 3 of the known extinction events in Earth's history have been tied to major impact events. with those extinction events being one of approximately 35 million years ago, and of course the much more famous dinosaur killer event of 65 million years ago. It's also been proposed that the Great Dying, or the Great Extinction event that occurred roughly 250 million years ago, could also be impact related, but at the moment that's still debatable. Additionally, astronomers have been unable to find any other supporting astronomical evidence that our sun has an unknown dark companion star or a large planet in a 28 million year orbit. As of this moment in the early 21st century, modern science does not have an idea of what could have caused these extinction events with such regularity. It is truly one of the greatest modern day mysteries of the scientific age. It is this mystery that will be our starting point for answering not just the question of who the gods are, but also what could be causing these similar regular extinction events every 28 million years on Earth. What you will find most surprising is that the answer is so remarkably simple. So simple, in fact, once you're aware of it, you may wonder why nobody has ever thought of this before. To begin with, and to just simply state it, I believe that we have been looking at this entire extinction mystery in the completely wrong manner, and that the real answer is to realize that there is a 100% natural process that we already have overwhelming evidence of, and that can explain these mysterious extinction events that occur every 28 million years. With this fully natural process being the evolution of intelligent species that develop up to the point of being able to create civilization. And not only creating civilization, but a civilization that keeps developing until it becomes an industrialized one. And soon after, a technologically advanced one. Much as we're doing right now over the last few hundred years. This idea at first may seem strange, with your first reaction most likely being to reject it out of hand without even a second thought. But you would be gravely mistaken for making this rejection. It would also mean that you are not only falling victim to our cultural programming, but also our natural human-centered prejudice that we are the first and only intelligent species that have ever arisen on this planet over the eons of its existence. Additionally, our own modern civilization provides us with the undeniable first-hand knowledge and the completely overwhelming evidence of exactly how the industrialization and technological advancement of a civilization is a highly destructive process to the overall ecosystems of the entire planet. Our own advancement has led to the extinction of numerous animals and plant species. So many, in fact, that many researchers and scientists are now trying to warn people through the popular press that we are causing a major extinction event, and if we do not change our ways very shortly, we will soon possibly be the cause of our own extinction. But if we can get around our natural human-centered prejudice and realize that the Earth may have produced numerous different intelligent species over the eons of its existence, then we can begin understanding for the first time that the many out-of-place artifacts found over the centuries could in fact be the last few traces of these ancient, long-forgotten intelligent species and civilizations that were built so long ago. The next step is realizing and understanding that 28 million years is more than enough time for not only for the Earth to heal itself of any damage that was caused by these intelligent species, but is also more than enough time to obliterate any and all traces of these earlier civilizations and anything that they created. Possibly more important, it is also enough time for the evolution and development of a new intelligent species, thereby repeating this pattern. This naturally raises the question of what happened to all these earlier intelligent species. Did they all simply go extinct? Given the vast amount of time involved in what we currently know scientifically, I think it would be reasonable to think that unless they were able to get out of our solar system and travel to the stars, they all went extinct. As you will shortly learn, there was one that didn't, which then brings us back to our original question of who the gods really are. With this new hypothesis in hand, we can now speculate with some confidence that these gods of our ancient ancestors are most likely the last intelligent species that evolved and developed a technologically advanced civilization on our little blue ball that we call Earth. This also raises the question of when in time did they first evolve and create their civilization? For us to answer this question, all we need to do is look back in time to see when the last major or significant extinction event took place. If we do this, we'll discover that the last significant extinction event that took place on Earth occurred roughly 12 to 14 million years ago. This extinction event is a rather odd and strange wave of extinctions of both terrestrial animals and plants, with numerous aquatic life forms that happen to occur in the middle of what's known as the Miocene era, roughly 14 million years ago, lasting to about 10 million years ago. This unusually long event is believed to have been caused by a relatively long, steady period of cooling that resulted in the growth of new ice sheets volumes across the globe. It is also believed that this cooling reestablished the bulk of the ice on what's known as the East Antarctic ice sheet. Although it is unknown what caused this cooling, it has been attributed to vast amount of CO2 being pulled out of the atmosphere and being caught in rock formations in different locations around the world. There are also theories that the cause of this cooling is connected to some change in climate that was due to changes in the ocean and atmospheric circulation. But the truth is there is not an accepted theory or an agreement on what may have actually caused this cooling event, and has proven to be quite a scientific mystery. With one last additional element, this now sets a stage that will allow me to present to you one last extraordinary story that will help explain the ultimate mystery of who the gods are and provide an answer to many of the lingering questions you still have. This last element is that we must assume that when this species originally lived on Earth, they physically looked much like us, if not almost exactly like us, and that they also behaved and thought much like ourselves. Both of these assumptions will be addressed and explained as we go through this remarkable final story and the completion of the secret history of creation. This final grand story begins roughly 14 million years ago, when an intelligent species that physically appeared and acted much like ourselves. They evolved and created a technologically advanced civilization that began reaching out and exploring the inner solar system, just as we've been doing over the last few decades. During this reaching out and exploring the solar system, they began to settle on Mars, just as we are planning to do. The primary difference between Mars of 14 million years ago and now is that Mars was more habitable than it is now. And this may have occurred naturally, or may be a sign that they were actually terraforming Mars and making it more habitable for themselves, as we hope to do ourselves. Either way, the main point is that they could exist and live on the surface of Mars without an artificial environment or aid. And later we will learn what happened to this habitable Mars and why it is now such a dead, frozen wasteland of a world today. It is during this settlement of Mars that something catastrophic happened back on Earth that made it so they could not or would not want to return to Earth for thousands, if not millions of years. Given what little information we have on the last major extinction event, I think it's highly probable that they may have basically destroyed their civilization with a nuclear war. With this resulting nuclear winter, which would follow such a war, could and would explain the prolonged cooling of the planet and the rather strange wave of extinctions that we see at this time. It would also explain why this particular extinction event occurred over such an unusually long period of time when compared to all the other known extinction events. It could have been caused by the radioactive contamination, and that it takes radioactive elements and their byproducts an unusually long time to decay into less harmful elements. A full-scale nuclear war would explain why the ones that had settled on Mars could not return or would not want to return to Earth, because there was simply nothing left for them to return to. And if any of them did return, they would most likely have died a long, slow, painful death due to radioactive contamination. As you can imagine, this is such a terrible event that it would have forced them to rebuild their entire society and eventually their civilization basically from scratch on the surface of Mars. It would also force them into physically adapting to living on Mars indefinitely, with little to no hope of ever returning home to Earth. This would cause several very particular and unique physical changes to their bodies as they came to live on Mars for countless generations. One of the single biggest physical changes that their bodies would undergo is due to the fact that Mars' gravity is much less than Earth's. The weaker gravity on Mars would cause them to start growing in size until their bodies felt like they did when they had lived on Earth. Mars' gravity is roughly 37% of that of Earth, which means that the Earth's gravity is approximately 2.7 times that of Mars. What makes this important is that over time they would grow to approximately 2.7 times their size they would have normally been on Earth, which, for example, would mean if they were on average to say 6 feet tall and say 200 pounds on average on Earth, then living on Mars over numerous generations, their bodies would grow to be approximately 16 feet in height, which would also make them weigh somewhere around 550 pounds or so if they were actually here on Earth. The next important change that would happen is they would begin losing any pigmentation or melanin they may have had in their skin and hair. This is the pigment that's secreted by all animals to darken their skin and hair to protect them from the harmful effects of ultraviolet radiation from the sun. On Mars, since there's so much less harmful ultraviolet radiation that reaches the planet anyway, plus the addition of a rather thick atmosphere making it habitable, the amount of UV radiation hitting the surface of the planet would be negligible. Which means that slowly over time, and even if they had similar racial differences as we do today, they would over the generations begin to lose them. They would all slowly develop a type of albinoism as their cells stopped secreting melanin. But unlike true albinoism, their cells would still be able to produce this melanin. It would just be in super tiny amounts. This would have the effect of causing their hair to either turn completely white or gray, or even possibly a light blonde. It would also have the remarkable effect of making their eyes turn crystal blue in color, which is exactly what is described in all the ancient texts of our ancient ancestors of what the true physical human-like appearance of the gods were said to have been like, as being like white men who were tall, bearded, with deep crystal blue eyes and white hair. This new realization of why the human-like form of the gods appeared the way they did also helps explain why the original humans may have been red, white, and black. It is highly likely that these colors were based on the original racial diversity that existed within the gods when they originally lived here on Earth. It makes sense that they would follow what they knew and model our human society and its general development based directly on their own personal experiences of their own history. It also fits with what little information we've learned about the general political structure of the gods themselves. Not only would they have undergone these and among numerous other physical changes, they would have also encountered a very practical problem that we ourselves will run into if and when we settle on Mars. And that problem is the fact that due to Mars's smaller size and much less geological activity, there is much less available metal in and on the surface of Mars than there is on Earth. What this means is that Mars will be very difficult, if not impossible, to actually mine for needed resources to support a technologically advanced settlement or colony. which means that they, just as we will have to do in the future, will need to look somewhere else for these raw materials, especially metal. And as you've most likely already guessed, and common sense and logic tells us, that the most likely source for this needed raw material is the asteroid belt that lies between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. This then raises the question of how they, or us, would in the future would do this. There are two possibilities when you find an asteroid you wish to mine. One is to go out to the asteroid and mine it, and then either return the raw ore for processing, or possibly process it there and then just return the final refined material. The other possibility is to go out and capture the asteroid and then physically move it into the orbit of Mars and then mine it there. Both methods have their pros and cons, but the second method makes much more sense from an engineering and energy point of view. There are also other important advantages to this method of mining asteroids, with the most likely one and most important being that you manage to keep your workforce and equipment much closer to home. This would also have the added benefit of greatly reducing the dangers of working in space far from help. By being in a low orbit, and if something went wrong, it would not take weeks or months for help to arrive, but possibly days or even just hours. In addition, the planet itself would help protect the entire operation from many of the other dangers of working in space. Over time, as this type of mining operation began to grow, it would require you to build several different support facilities so you can maintain it, and you would also need to build facilities for maintaining and servicing all the necessary mining equipment you need. It would also make sense to build any number of different manufacturing facilities and to turn this raw material into finished products that were needed. It also has the added advantage that you would be able to create materials and products that can only be made in a perfect vacuum or a very low or no gravity environment, which again can only be done in orbit. Additionally, you would have to build the necessary support facilities to house not only the miners, but also all the support personnel that keeps everything else running, including all the needed air, waste recycling systems, the power and fuel to run it all. Finally, you would need to build transportation facilities and docking bays so you can move all this material, equipment, and people back and forth between the surface and into orbit. This allows us to realize and understand that the primary reason the mighty heaven was built in the first place, and that it was not a great spaceship that was built to travel to the stars, but it was really a massive support and manufacturing facility for mining asteroids they had captured and placed in orbit around Mars. It was, in essence, a massive space station that was slowly built up over a very long period in time in order to support their mining operations in orbit. Additionally, and now understanding the reason why these people would have turned into giants, we can now understand the reasons for its massive size was just to accommodate their logical physical state when compared to us. These few factors allow us to finally answer a couple of long-standing mysteries about the many ancient monolithic buildings that scatter the globe with their almost unbelievable stonework. We can finally understand that by living on Mars and with its general lack of metal, their primary building material would have most likely have been stone. This would have happened over a long period of time, in this case possibly millions of years, and it would force them to naturally develop an incredibly high degree of skill and technology and techniques for working with stone. Again, by understanding why they would have basically turned into giants living on Mars, the large size of the ancient monolithic buildings and temples begin to make perfect sense. Although many of these ancient buildings are huge compared to us and our ancestors, but for the gods, who we are told look like very tall white men, they would have been much more normal sized. The next aspect we need to examine is the possibility that this other species extended their lifespans. All the ancient myths tell us that our ancient ancestors viewed these gods as immortal. Using this information and our new knowledge, we can speculate on why they may have wanted to extend their lifespans. Although there are numerous reasons on why any intelligent species would want to extend their lifespans, I think in this case there are some more practical reasons on why they would have wanted to do this. The first and most obvious reason would have been to greatly increase their odds of survival, especially if they had only started out with a small number of individuals at the very beginning. Another reason they may have wanted to extend their lifespans is because they hoped to have one day to return to Earth if they lived long enough. A possible third reason could be the most practical of them all. They needed to extend their lifespans because they were trying to leave the solar system in order to go to the stars and colonize new worlds. As much as we enjoy science fiction and the idea of a shortcut through space like warp speed or wormholes or hyperspace, the hardcore truth is that according to our current understanding of physics, this more or less appears to be impossible to go faster than the speed of light. Not saying that it will be in the future, it's just at the moment it doesn't look like we can. Which means traveling to the stars, even the closest ones, will take hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, to complete the journey. This severely limits how many individuals you could take and raises the problem of how you keep your crew alive such a long voyage. Modern science tells us that there aren't too many options available to keep your crew alive for hundreds or even possibly thousands of years on a ship. One is to place your crew in some type of suspended animation, possibly freezing them for the long journey, then awakening them upon their arrival. But it should be noted that the latest research appears to support the idea that suspended animation, as we've seen in science fiction, may have to stay there, and does not appear to be truly viable for us humans. Another common idea is that you would build a multi-generational ship where the children of each generation would be born, live, and then die aboard the ship until the last generation reached their destination of a new world. The last but not least among the ideas would be to extend the lifetime of your crew so they could live long enough to complete the journey and not condemn their children or descendants to essentially a life of imprisonment upon a ship not of their making, on a journey not of their choosing. As you can see, out of those possible options, that extending your lifespan so you can live long enough to make the journey would be the preferred method most would agree with and would choose for several different moral, ethical, and personal reasons. Although many rarely think about it, extending our lifespans would have several downsides. In addition, if we were able to start extending our lifespans, it would require an almost unbelievable radical change to our society and civilization. One of the most important things that would happen to any society that began extending their lifespans is that they would quickly have to control their population, balancing births with deaths. Not only does this become necessary in order to preserve your population and civilization, but it becomes even more critical as you keep increasing everybody's lifespans to hundreds, if not possibly thousands of years. You would quickly reach a point where you could only allow a birth to happen when someone died. And a society like this could not, as a whole, take the chance of allowing any unplanned births to happen. This alone would cause major and radical changes to personal relationships, not to mention the massive changes that society as a whole would have to make in order to make sure no unplanned births occurred. If we take a moment, we can understand that our ancient ancestors provide a small insight into how these so-called immortal gods may have maintained their population. If we realize that our Cro-Magnon man ancestors were either imitating what they saw the gods do, or as we're told in so many of the myths and legends, as they were instructed on how they should have structured their society by the strict orders of the gods, we can realize that what they are doing is most likely a reflection of the gods' thought of how the proper way to structure a culture and society, which naturally would be based on their own. By realizing this, we can understand that normally in most ancient societies, and then still in some of our cultures today, the different sexes are kept apart and separated from one another until marriage. In addition, it is also common in most ancient traditions that the marriages were actually arranged by the parents, typically with the help of the local religious authorities. This is a type of arrangement of keeping the sexes separated from one another until the time of marriage would be a perfect solution of trying to solve the problem of unwanted births by preventing them from even possibly happening in the first place. This allows us to begin to understand that almost all of our ancient traditions come from or are directly influenced by the gods, which must in turn have been based on the way they organized their own society. This allows us to understand for the first time why not just the gods, but ancient societies in general were so socially rigid and culturally unchanging for such long periods of time. It was because their social structure was based on one that had built up around a people extending their lifespans with the necessary population control and traditions needed to maintain it. In addition, it allows us to understand that their entire society, culture, and civilization may have been built around and became primarily focused on mining asteroids, extending their lifespans, and possibly building ships to travel to the stars, all while maintaining their society and rigidly controlling their population in order to allow the rest to happen. This then brings us to one of the most important aspects of extending your lifetime. It will also answer one of the biggest mysteries about the gods and why the events occurred over such an incredibly long period of time. As we have learned through our journey into the mystical symbolism of the dream vision, many of these great events recorded in the ancient texts took place over thousands and thousands of years, not the few decades or hundreds of years that we have been traditionally taught to believe. This effect is directly related to them extending their lifespans and is something we will encounter if we manage to extend our own lifespans. It is also an effect we already experience, although we seldom think about it until it becomes a problem with people in old age. This effect is that when we get older, our perception of the passage of time changes. This is something we will all experience as we get older, as the passage of time seems to speed up. In a groundbreaking 1983 article, it is discussed that the relationship between our actual age and what is known as our effective age is that the passage of years go faster as we get older. This idea actually makes sense once you think about it. For example, when you're 10 years of age, a year represents approximately 10% of your life and seems like a very long time. However, when you're 50 years old, 1 year has reduced to only 2% of your life and hence seems only 1/5 as long. What this means is that as we grow older, our perception of time speeds up with our age. This is why every year of our life seems to get shorter than the previous one that comes before. Which means if you happen to reach the age of 100 years of age, a minute will seem like it's about 6 seconds long compared to a minute when you were 10 years of age. An hour will seem more like 6 minutes. A day will seem more like a couple of hours, and etc. It is believed that this effect will keep getting worse if we extend out our lifetimes. At around approximately 1,000 years of age, it is believed that this effect would make decades feel like months and centuries feel like years. It is also believed that if you could extend your life out for tens of thousands of years or even hundreds of thousands of years, that this effect would get so bad that 1,000 years would feel as if it was only one day. And it was also thought to believe that due to the limitations of the human mind, you would probably go completely insane long before you could get to this point without physically altering our minds. What makes this so remarkable is that we're told in 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 8 of the New Testament of the Bible of exactly this type of phenomenon when it comes to the Lord God. But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. This allows us to speculate that their lifespans may be counted in the tens of thousands of years. It also allows us to realize that from our point of view and our standards, they very well all may be completely insane beyond anything we can even imagine. This little insight into the fact that they may be completely insane will become important in the next video. It will also help explain some of the events surrounding the final war. With this knowledge in hand, we can begin understanding why the events surrounding the gods take place over thousands of years and appear to unfold so slowly when compared to our normal everyday lives. It is because of this difference in their perception of the passage of time between our two species. It also allows us to realize that because of this difference, it may be difficult, if not impossible, for them to actually communicate with us in any truly meaningful manner. From their perspective, our individual lives may appear very short and rather meaningless. Also, if by chance they really are tens of thousands of years old or even older, our individual lives may seem like they last only for mere hours or days to them. All of this allows us to understand that it's highly probable this could be one of the primary reasons why they have managed to survive for so long when all the other species that came before us either left the solar system or went extinct so long ago. So long ago that nobody even suspected they even existed in the first place. This brings us to the next important part of the story and why they would have returned to Earth after living on Mars what appears to be for millions of years. Considering the information we've just covered, I think the answer is rather simple. Is that after 10 to 14 million years of capturing and mining small asteroids for metal and raw materials, they very simply just ran out of small metal-rich asteroids to mine. This would of course mean that an incredibly dense ring of possibly hundreds of thousands, if not millions of small mined-out asteroids with billions of tons of debris from mining would have circled Mars. Again, in the next video, we'll learn what happened to this hypothetical ring of material around Mars. After running out of their primary source of metal and raw materials, as you can imagine, they would have not had much choice in the entire matter. This would have forced them to make the choice to either return to Earth or their civilization would slowly die and they would go extinct. With our new understanding that heaven was more of a space station-like craft for supporting their mining operation than an actual spacecraft built for travel, we can begin realizing that this would have been a massive and highly risky operation to move such a large structure that was not originally designed for it in the first place. This most likely would have been an operation that would have required the resources of their entire civilization in order of having any hope of accomplishing it successfully. It is also easy to imagine that this entire operation may have been viewed as an incredible opportunity for them to finally be returning home to Earth after so many millions of years of after being forced to leave. It's also hard not to think that in so many ways this may have been viewed in a religious-like manner with the great experience of being able to return home to the promised land and the home of their ancestors after so long. After they had successfully moved to heaven and placed it in Earth's orbit, they would have encountered a unique problem that we typically do not think of today: Earth's gravity. After living and adapting to live on Mars with its lower gravity, they would have found Earth's gravity absolutely and literally crushing. This would be especially true realizing that their larger physical size would also cause problems and make it even worse for them. It would be a reasonable guess that none of them, except possibly the strongest among them, could have even stood on the surface of the Earth. The gravity would overwhelm them and instantly drive them to the ground, making them feel like their body weight had almost tripled. Their hearts would have also been put under incredible stress as they strained to pump blood through their huge bodies in this stronger gravity. It is also very likely that they would have had difficulty breathing the much denser atmosphere of Earth. Not only would they find it difficult to actually be on the surface of the Earth without some type of mechanical or artificial means of aid, but they would also have found the amount of sunlight during the day on Earth to be possibly overwhelming and blinding without eye and skin protection. They would have most likely found the surface temperatures of Earth to be very hot and uncomfortable when compared to what the average temperature of a fully habitable Mars would have been. For example, on how overwhelming it would have been for them, our idea of a perfect warm sunny day would be in fact an absolute hell for them. They'd find the sunlight blindingly bright, even damaging to their eyes. The warm temperatures would quickly cause their huge bodies to overheat and possibly even kill them in a short amount of time. In addition, the bright sunlight would most likely burn their skin, quickly resulting in second-degree burns on any unprotected surfaces. Although the Earth may have been their original home, the million years of adapting to live on Mars would have made Earth a very harsh, if not deadly, environment for them to return to after so many eons. It also allows us to make a reasonable guess about the mystery of why they returned to Earth. In our next video, we will explore this great return and when it may have happened. It will also help fill in the last few details of the secret history of creation. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button below and subscribe for future videos.